Get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. We are talking about a story that I haven't heard before, about the one liberal journalist who decided that they were going to stand up for Trump when it came to the whole Russian collusion lie that was out in the media for so long. And this person was right out in front, right away, knew that this wasn't true, stood up. He was at Rolling Stone at the time. They backed him down, said that he couldn't look into the story. Very interesting stuff. And the guy's not even a Trump supporter. Straight up liberal, doesn't even like Trump, but he understood that what they were saying wasn't true. Very interesting stuff. Let's start it off with this clip right here. We're going to do Joe Rogan, bunch of Joe Rogan, and then I'm going to show you the story because it was between the liberal journalist and Tucker Carlson. Let's get into it.
Is that he exposed the media. He exposed the media for being essentially a propaganda agent. It's not just the news.
Yep.
And to pretend it's the news, they never covered anything that he did that was positive. Anything had some negative spin on it. They spent years talking about some fake collusion story with Russia and never apologized for it, never took it back. And they'll allow people on the show to support that, to try to justify that, or to try to even say that it's not true, that he did collaborate with Russia.
Very interesting stuff. This is one of those ones where I've heard Joe Rogan talk about this so much. I've watched other podcasts and interviews talking about it, but I never knew that this one journalist wanted to cover this story, wanted to figure out what was really going on, and they just absolutely shut him down. Of course, we're going to play another Joe Rogan. Believe it or not, that's Joe Rogan right there. Let's get into it.
You had all of that happening at the same time that high-up members of the national security apparatus in this country were coming out going, we have information that the president of the United States is either working for Russia, conspiring, has conspired with Russia.
Had girls pee on him.
They were accusing him of treason. You got to remember this. They were accusing the guy of treason. This was not like he got a blowjob in the Oval Office. This is treason. And his supporters enabled a coup in our country backed by Russia. None of that. 2 years, 3 years on TV.
And
every
everybody
night.
repeated it.
Everyone repeated it. No one has since apologized. Nobody has said we were wrong. Nobody has shown any interest in getting to the bottom of how that happened. They cook up this fake Steele dossier, claiming all these things, the P tape, all of that stuff. All of this intelligence ends up being, for lack of a better word, pretty unsourced. And the Clinton campaign paid for that dossier.
Yeah.
And so all of that stuff, unreal how corrupt. Now, when you zoom out and you look, and then you go, well, there's this old guy with dementia that they don't want to give up on, and then you zoom out, and you go, oh, maybe there is something else happening. I don't know.
It's very interesting, man, because here's the thing. What happened to Clinton for finding that out? Because that is a true thing that happened. I believe they were fined, I believe it is $113,000. It was basically a slap on the wrist to someone who's a multimillionaire. That was it. But it came out. It was true. It wasn't a big story. Nobody wanted to cover it. And then the other thing that Tim brought up is that they were accusing him of treason. And we all know what comes along with a charge of treason. And then, like he just said, when you really pull back and you look at everything that's happened, and you look at what happened just a few weeks ago to Trump, whatever happens, if you are guilty of treason, it seemed like someone tried to make that happen again. It's almost like it's been in the works for a while of them trying to get him. And on the surface, it just looks like they're trying to attack his character. But in reality, it's way more sinister, especially when you start bringing up the word treason. Let's move on to the next clip here. Oh, pull that down. There you go.
For sure, it was rigged by the media. For sure. Just the Hunter Biden laptop case and the Russia collusion case. Just those two things.
Yeah.
Just those two narratives that they knew were not true, that they pushed out in front of everybody, and that we know, had to do with trying to get rid of Trump. That was a big. That is
one over-reporting and one under-reporting.
Yeah,
yeah.
That is in many ways. That's
an attempt to
manipulation.
Yeah.
It's manipulation of a public narrative. It's a manipulation of what the people think is real and not real. Everybody thought he was in collusion with Russia. It's what everybody thought. It's what they were just all these mainstream except Fox News.
Yeah.
They were the only ones. They were the only ones that weren't pushing it. Everybody else was pushing it.
Yeah, it was sold hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not true, and it's proven to be not true. And then there's the Hunter Biden laptop thing, which they knew was true, and they said wasn't true.
Yeah.
And they told you that they stopped people from sharing it on social media. They stopped people from sharing it on Twitter. Zuckerberg sat in that very chair and said that the FBI contacted Facebook and told them that it was Russian disinformation. They were getting a bunch of Russian disinformation. And so they limited the spread of that.
Wow.
I don't know how they did it. I don't know exactly what they did to limit the distribution of that.
It's a switch. They switch you on, they switch you off. That's how they do it. But it's interesting when it comes to this whole collusion thing, because think about the people who and I'm going to move on to the next clip now, but just wanted to say really quick, think about the people who they've accused of that, right? I believe Tulsi got that accusation before Trump. So first it was Tulsi. Guess who actually accused her of that? The first person, Hillary. Hillary was the first person to say that about Tulsi, and that got pushed around everywhere. Then Trump, who was behind that. And then Tucker Carlson. Now, she wasn't behind that, but the mainstream media was very much so. They started saying that about Tucker. And even recently, there was some kind of rumor or propaganda going around that Tucker Carlson actually had a Russian network, something that was playing in Russia. Like he had some kind of Russian network. Again, they're trying to say that he's colluding with Russia. It's been an ongoing thing. And for some reason, I don't know about you, but I never believe it. I never believe it when I hear somebody say that there's Russian collusion going on between whoever. I can't, I don't know. And it's not just because it's Trump, Tulsi, and Tucker, and I like those people. It's just, it always seems so far-fetched to me. I don't know. Anyway, let's get to the next clip.
That no one who should be in a position of leadership wants that. And most of these people that could be effective in a position of leadership because they've led things before, whether it's businesses or what have you, they just don't want to have anything to do with it. It's just a horrible attack on your character. They don't play fair. They lie. They'll get people to say things that aren't true. They'll concoct stories. They'll put things out there with the aid of the intelligence community, like the Russia collusion agenda, like that thing. And then they get all the media that's on the left on board, and then they just repeat this mantra over and over: Russia collusion, Russia collusion, and then they'll pretend that they didn't say that he never won the election. Right. They'll pretend. They pretend that they didn't question the election. They'll pretend that Hillary Clinton didn't do multiple speeches where she said that the election was stolen. Yeah. He's not a legitimate president. Russia stole the election with no evidence.
Yeah.
But when he questions the election, it's a threat to democracy.
Right.
It's just so convenient. And we live in this bizarre news cycle where there's information is coming at you so fast, you kind of forget about what the thing you were mad about 2 days ago that could affect the rest of the country for decades.
Right.
And you're just on to the next.
That's how I feel about Kamala Harris supporters. I mean, vote for who you want, but they seem to forget so quickly that they were supposed to vote that person in, and they're just like, I don't care, whatever, not Trump. And you're like, wow, that worked on you very well, very, very well. Because you couldn't do that with Trump supporters. If Trump got switched out, they'd be like, what the hold on a second. Who is this guy? Who is this? I don't know this guy. Can we vote? Are there some options? That's what would happen right away. And if not, it would get, you know how it would get. Anyway, let's move on. Tucker Carlson actually speaking with the gentleman who wanted to stand up for Trump, although he didn't even like Trump. Okay? He had a book. He had some book that was actually a negative book about Trump that he put out. This guy's not a Trump supporter, but he's a journalist. And he wanted to make sure that the story that was going around was true. And he could tell, just based on his years of experience, that it wasn't. Listen to his story.
But just to take the look at the Russiagate story, they made so many mistakes on that. Jeff Girth.
Okay, wait, so before you, let's put you at the center of this, because you were one of the reasons we're having this conversation. Is you were one of the only liberals in all media who said, and you speak Russian, you live there for 10 years, like you have credibility on this question, I would say. And you were the only ones who said, I don't like Trump, I didn't vote for Trump, but like, I don't think this is real.
I had a book out at the time called Insane Clown President about Donald Trump. Right? I mean, I'm not a fan of the guy, right? But they came to me.
So where were you when the Russiagate thing started?
I was at Rolling Stone. And
what did you think when you first heard that he was a Russian agent?
So it was in late 2016. It was right after he had gotten elected. You remember that list that came out, Prop or Not? Well, the Washington posted this story about this weird blacklist that they had discovered of people who the Russians were supposedly in league with. And it was this shadowy organization called Prop or Not. And they linked to this list of sites, and without any evidence at all, they were linking all kinds of independent journalists to Russia. And I thought, well, that's crazy. And then there was this whole thing about I actually had to do a segment on MSNBC with Chris Hayes. The other guest was Malcolm Nance, of all people, and it was all about, is Trump in league before he got inaugurated? Is Trump, in league with the Russians? There had just been a big leak about that. And I thought, well, there's no evidence for this, right? Like we just had a catastrophic episode in journalism with the WMD thing where anonymous sources get us in a lot of trouble. If you can't recreate the experiment in the lab, you got to be careful of that story, right? And that's all I said. I wasn't like, he's innocent, like I just thought this is a dangerous story. Let's all be careful with this. And immediately there was this reaction that was just shocking to me. It was like this shunning thing. It happened to me. It happened to, Greenwald, obviously, Aaron Mate at The Nation. There was like a group letter that was written by the rest of the staff, denouncing him, the husband of the editor of the Nation, also the Stephen Cohen. They didn't want him around.
Wonderful man.
He was, yeah, absolutely. He was a good friend of mine. But it was crazy because this was so early in the process, and everybody had already predetermined that this thing was true. This extraordinary, complicated thesis. They had somehow already arrived at the conclusion that it was proven. And
so at this point, you didn't know either way?
I didn't really know either way, but I had a strong suspicion that it was wrong, right? Like this, journalists have a sense, or the sixth sense. It doesn't smell right, right? Like it's kind of like the French Connection where Gene Hackman looks over and he says, that's a wrong table, right? Yeah. Like this was a wrong table. It didn't look right. And
I felt the same way.
Yeah. And it was too complicated for me to see. I wish I had known at the time.
Even in right-wing world where I then worked and lived, I felt like everyone believed it.
Yeah. But how is that possible?
Well, I remember saying to somebody, I think this could be like complete bullshit, like actual bullshit. And my friend goes, be careful. I think there's something there. And I was like, okay. By the way, I try to be very open-minded. Like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you're actually a space alien. I don't know. Prove it to me.
Right.
I really try to keep every possibility open. But I kept asking people like, what? Okay. How do we know this?
Right.
Well, everybody believed it.
Yeah.
Why?
They hated Trump. That was obvious, but that wasn't enough for me, right? Like just on a superficial level, it didn't fit. Donald Trump, you want to tell me he's involved in some mob deal to build a casino in Atlantic City or something like that, right? I'd believe that. Donald Trump being James Bond and involved in a 5-year conspiracy with the Russian government, what did Steele call it? A well-developed conspiracy of 5 years. That's ridiculous. This is a guy who if you've been to any of his campaign speeches, he can't get through the first sentence of one of his scripts. Like his brain is already off in another direction. how is that guy going to keep a secret? It didn't make any sense. And nobody had any evidence. And then even when things came out that should have been fatal to the story, like when it finally came out in October of 2017 that the Clinton campaign had funded the Steele dossier, I thought, well, it's over now, right?
With the Republican donor too.
Well, yes, yeah, sort of previously, right? Steele didn't come on until later, but still, once that came out, and you knew that campaign research had ended up in an intelligence assessment, that should have been it, I thought. And everybody just plowed ahead like it was still a thing. And
so what happened to you in the middle of all? So you're at Rolling Stone, you're this famous liberal reporter, one of the most famous liberal reporters, actually. And you make the mistake of saying, well, we don't know for a fact this is true. People start shunning you. Where does it go from there?
So then I started to get angry about it. And at one point I went,
why?
Oh, because, I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like to be told that I got to ignore something.
Yes.
Right. Like I'm one of those difficult personalities in journalism, right? Like, it just happens that way. But I went to Rolling Stone at one point. I had really good editors there for the most part, but I went to them and I said, look, this story's wrong, right? And it's going to come out that it's wrong. Give me 8 weeks to chase this down, and let's be the first mainstream organization to get it right and put it to bed, and it'll be a coup for us, right? Let me do my thing on this. And they said no. The first time they ever said no to me on, like an investigative project.
And just to restate, you speak Russian. You can read Russian. So there's probably no one better to do the story.
Yeah, I would think, right? I even had some sources over there, right, who could have chased it down, certain aspects of it down, like, the Trump Tower deal and all that stuff. Like that would have been relatively easy to go through. And I had covered Congress. So the people who were investigating this, like I knew some of those folks too. And it's a great story. I mean, when it first came out, it was obvious. This is either the biggest intelligence coup in history, right? The Russians getting a Manchurian candidate in the White House, or it's the biggest fake in history, right? The biggest setup in history. Somebody's either telling the biggest whopper ever, or the Russians have just pulled off the most amazing thing. It can't. There's no other option.
Yes.
There, right. So if it's not this, it's that, and we might as well be the first to report that, right?
Yes.
And
so what did they say when you make?
They said no.
On what grounds?
I don't even remember what the excuse was. They just weren't enthused about the idea, and I understood that, like they're a Rolling Stone. They have an audience that has certain expectations, but that was a big moment for me. I was naive. I actually thought that the magazine would be interested in going there, because they had let me, go against Obama before. They had let me do other things, but not on this. So,
what did your colleagues say to you? Because by this point, I think it was becoming public to anyone who was watching, like me, that you were dissenting from the line on this question.
Yeah. So I would say Glenn Greenwald took the brunt of it. There were stories in the New Yorker profiles, the bane of their resistance, right? Like, why is Glenn Greenwald being a stick in the mud about this Russia thing? That was like a feature topic in magazines, like a bunch of them. And, and they concluded, by the way, that he was motivated by his impatience with the rise of women and minorities in the Democratic Party. It was unbelievable.
He was a racist.
Right.
Glenn's a racist.
I actually had the physical copy of the New Yorker when that came out.
Did they really say that?
They did, yeah. And it was an on-the-record quote by one of his former editors, of all things.
That Glenn's a racist.
Yeah, well, they didn't.
Right. Well, he's impatient with the rise of women and minorities.
So when I saw that, I'm like, wow, this is like, what is going on with this, right? And meanwhile, I was getting it from all angles. There were former American diplomats who were going after me online saying I was in league with Putin, and
Seriously?
yeah.
It's kind of a heavy charge.
Yeah, you would think, and that was becoming increasingly common. It was an implication of a lot of the back and forth on social media.
And I can't play too much of the episode, but it led to him not working for the Rolling Stone anymore. And the shunning that he was talking about ended up turning into a blackballing. In regards to the mainstream media sphere, there was nothing that he could do. Now, of course, he has things like Substack. He's on, I'm not even sure if he's on Twitter anymore because him and Elon Musk ended up having a beef. But he might be on Twitter still. Substack. So there still is a career for him. I actually get his emails almost every day. He's constantly writing stuff. So, yeah, that's what ended up happening to him. All because he wanted to really figure out what was going on. And if you notice again, what was the thing that happened? They accused him of colluding with Russia. Absolutely amazing. And then they accused Glenn Greenwald of being a racist. And those two things right there should tell you that you've hit on something, or if you're watching a situation play out and all of a sudden they point and say that guy's racist and that guy's colluding with Russia, you have to understand right away, those two people they're pointing at, you might want to go hear what they have to say. You don't want to just push them aside so quickly because that's what they do it for. That's their simple tactic. Very, very interesting stuff. So it turned into an independent media career for this gentleman, Matt Taibbi. But I guess it was all for the best because why would you want to work for the Rolling Stone anyway? I mean, today, because that happened years ago, right? But today, you don't want to, why would you even want to be seen working for Rolling Stone? That's just my opinion. I've seen the stuff that they roll out. They always have the worst takes because you can tell it's contrived. It's very contrived. If something happens, like I can only imagine what they have to say about Elon Musk and Donald Trump sitting down together. You know what? Let me just look at that real quick. Elon Musk, Trump, convo, Rolling Stone. They always have these such forced takes. Elon Musk says he's giving $45 million per month to Trump. That's actually not true, oddly enough. Bernie Sanders interview, Trump versus Biden AI. Yeah, so they just have a bunch of weird takes. They haven't spoken on that exact interview yet. They're just more talking about Trump seeking cash because he needs cash because he's broke. But they always have these terrible, terrible takes on whatever is out there, whether it's left or right. Whenever it's left, they try to flower it up the best they can. Whenever it's something that's right-leaning or about people who are conservative, they try to play it down as much as possible, demonize it as much as possible. So for someone like Matt Taibbi, that's not something that you want to be involved with because, whether you guys know it or not, he's one of the last people that's coming from mainstream, like hardcore journalists. He's one of the last. He's the one that said when he was on Joe Rogan, he said something very interesting. He said there is supposed to be a tension between the press and the people in power, politicians and whatnot. He goes, that's how it's supposed to be. They're not supposed to be really good friends and really close because he was talking about the way things are today. He goes, that's not what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to see you coming and know that they have to be on their game. They got to stay sharp. They're going to have to answer some questions. It shouldn't be, the press and the politicians get together and they say, well, what the people want to hear. Well, we'll just tell them this. Okay, we'll just direct it like this. All right, let's turn on the camera. It's not supposed to go like that. That's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to sit down and say, I have some questions for you. I hope you can answer everything. And they're supposed to be a little bit like, oh, gosh. Oh, I hope I don't look bad. That's how it's supposed to be. So I always remember him because he said those words. I always think of that now. And when I see any journalist and politician and there's not too much tension when they interview, outside of that, okay. But when they interview or when they're being questioned or when they're trying to get information out of them, if there's no tension, it shows a little something, you know? Anyways, guys, that is a very odd story. That is how you get blackballed in the mainstream media. You stand up for Trump or just stand against any agenda or narrative they're trying to push forward, and you will be quickly blackballed, and that will be it. But here's the thing. If it wasn't for X and if it wasn't for Substack, this guy would be done. He'd be done. And Rogan a little bit too, because Rogan has him on the podcast from time to time. I think about 3 or maybe 4 times he's had him on the podcast. But he would be done if it wasn't for those outlets. And that's what they wanted. That's the thing. That's what they wanted. Because he was pushing, because he was trying to figure out what was really going on. He wasn't just going along and doing the Project Mockingbird thing. They really wanted him out of there. It's a gross world, mainstream media. It is a very gross world. I thank God that I'm just here in a room. I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to get approval from anybody. And that's it. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and other than that, I'm out.